Stephanie sent to Felicia is really good, and then it didn't.
Don't worry.
Okay.
Hi.
Hi. Hello. Hello.
Everybody.
Hello.
Hi, everyone. My forehead's a little big. Hi. Can you hear me?
Yes, yes, yes. So we're going to go ahead and get started. So first of all, thank you for joining us tonight. And thank you to our partners, Black Public Media and Roland Martin, for streaming this town hall. And thank you to all the organizations joining us tonight. The Sentence Review Project, Color of Change, the Aquanati Foundation, Real Justice PAC, and New York Public Advocate. And a special thank you to Korey Weiss, one of the men now known as Exonerated Five, for joining us as well. Ava DuVernay's When They See Us has sparked a much needed conversation about juvenile justice and race in America. I know that it's been a conversation that me and my family have been having in our living rooms, and it's also reignited conversations about how the media reports stories about Black and brown youth. The significance of this particular case is much broader than the miscarriage of justice that was inflicted on these five men at the time who were children: Kevin Richardson, Antron McCray, Raymond Santana Jr., Korey Weiss, and Yusuf Salaam. We need to understand what has been done to them to understand what happened and has happened to millions of Black and brown young men in America every single day. Tonight, we are talking about the ways in which we could transform the justice system, how we can turn our anger into action. In this four-part town hall, we'll dive deeper into current campaigns, what the leading efforts for change look like, and how we can support these efforts for greater opportunity. We'll be taking a few questions for each segment, so please share questions in the comments below and tag us on our Twitter handle at NY Justice League. And to kick things off, we'll be talking about the landscape of the justice reform system here in America. And so segment one is Justice Reform in America. I'd like to welcome my sister, Lateefah Simon, president of the Aquanati Foundation and the 2003 MacArthur Fellow. Lateefah, thank you for joining us. I also want to share with everyone that Lateefah and I go way, way back when she was the executive director of the Young Freedom Center. And so when they see us, excavates the truth about the surrounding how five Black men and Latino children were wrongfully convicted for an attack on a jogger in Central Park 5 in 1989. And I certainly want to uplift the fact that, you know, we also want to make sure that when we're talking about this, that we're also honoring the victims. But this resulted in prison sentences that lasted as long as 13 years. We know this case is not an isolated incident or a rare occurrence. Our criminal justice system is stacked against people of color, especially young people of color, beginning with the moment they come into contact with law enforcement. Often, Black and brown youth are prosecuted before they ever step into the courtroom. Can you share with us some of the efforts you've been involved with?
Yeah, I think thank you so much. It's such an honor to be on the line with all of you all, sister. You are my hero. I'm 42, but I started organizing on the streets and in jails when I was on probation at the age of 16 and 17, and I worked at the Center for Young Women's Development as an organizer, and then as the executive director at 19. 26 years later, we're still fighting the same fights all over the country. Young women, you know, in the mid-90s were being arrested and charged with crimes that were not crimes. They were simply street children in the midst of the crack war trying to survive. And what we knew and what we saw as young women running our own organization was that very few people were coming for us. Very few people were coming to our aid. What I learned in working with my sisters in the courtroom was there was no judge. There was no jury. Oftentimes there was a probation officer who would send them upstairs into a cage at the age of 15, 16 to 17 for participating in the drug trade, the low-level drug trade, might I say, and or being prostituted. They were put in cages, and then the next morning, oftentimes without their parents, stood in front of judges with an attorney that they never met. And in 7 minutes, no jury, oftentimes were given a decision that affected the rest of their lives. today, and what I'm so humbled to be a part of this conversation today across the country and counties across the country, justice is not being delivered to either victims or young people. I have watched and also walked hundreds of young people out of jails and prisons, understanding that justice wasn't served based on their incarceration. Real justice looks so much different. It means jobs, it means healing. We know all of this, but the way forward is, which I'm sure the conversation we're gonna have tonight, is to convince district attorneys that caging babies, whether guilty or innocent, it doesn't provide healing for victim or what we call offender, but which is really the child. Ava's movie and the life of these young men have showed us that the justice system has failed.
Thank you. Thank you so much for that. And I know you've been doing this work for quite some time. What are some of the challenges that you feel have presented themselves? And then where have you seen justice reform go, right? I know you said you're in your 40s, very similar to myself. And so we've been here before, right? But I know that we're having a very different conversation, especially when Barack Obama went to a prison. So what are some of the challenges, and where have you seen maybe progress in the justice system?
Well, progress is happening all across the country on the grounds in cities and counties. In juvenile justice or injustice, these systems operate on a county level. It's important for many of these groups, like the groups that you run. We do political education with parents and young people, both in the courtroom, in their homes, and on the streets. And what we tell folks is, when you're arrested and you're charged with a crime, there's a lot of people involved with that. When you're detained, when you get a disposition, there's a lot of folks involved with that, but there are decision makers who make decisions on how long you serve, where you serve, what you should be charged with. And so across the country in counties like Alameda and San Francisco, in Santa Cruz County, where you did so much of your work on the ground with young women who are locked up, few people think we're just new to the game, but we've been in it for 25 years. We know, and there are counties like the ones that I've talked about where we've seen a deep reduction, both in youth being tried as an adult. Frankly, in California, that's against the law now, which is a huge victory for all of those folks. Many of the folks who served long sentences, who had to fight those fights in the California legislature, but also at the ballot box. So we're not charging young people as adults without fitness hearings anymore. In Alameda County, while we have so much work to do, and I want to be a part of closing down or providing resources to close down much of these unneeded facilities, the populations of juveniles incarcerated have dropped by nearly half, but there are still babies in cages. In San Francisco, the Young Women's Freedom Center have pushed the Board of Supervisors and 300 organizations to stand behind them to say that this city no longer needs a jail for children and that we can do better. If not today, in a couple of years. You have Multnomah County. I mean, I can go on and on and on. The beautiful work that y'all have been doing in New York City, and it's really been inspired by young people. It's really been inspired by, young attorneys who stood with these children and watched them being carried away to camps where there's no healing. It's really been by victims of crime who said, I lost my child, and sending this child away for the rest of their lives doesn't bring back my child. If he gets out in 25 years and does it again, we need a new system. So the fact that criminal justice and juvenile justice, much because of the culture shifters like Ava and yourself and other folks, have brought these issues to the forefront and not just in the shadows. We're seeing policy change. We're seeing these cases, not in the larger issues being litigated in courtrooms. And there is a nomenclature that we need to free our children from all sources and all forms of criminalization. So we ain't all free yet, but I think we're getting there.
Well, I just want to thank you for all your work. I mean, 25 years is a long time. I know that you've been at every level. I used to see you on the front lines and providing direct services, and now you're running a foundation, which is, something that we need. And so I want to continue to encourage those that are watching to post your questions in the comments or tag us on Twitter at NY Justice League, and we'll answer a few at the end of the segment. And so I'm going to go ahead and turn it, please stay with us, but I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Angelo Pinto of Justice League NYC and the former campaign manager of Raise the Age NY. Thank you, Angelo, for joining us. And, to your point, Lateefah, when you're talking about a lot of these efforts have been led by young people because young people are the ones that are directly impacted. I know that when I watched the film, I was already deeply familiar with the story, but I was struck by the vulnerability of the children. This is something that we see every single day, right? We see it with the young people that we serve in detention centers. We see it with young people in our communities. I know many of us have come from these communities. And so, in New York, Angelo, we had a long fight just to get legislation passed in 2007 to raise the age. Tell us about what that change looked like and what is the next step? I know that, for us, it kind of seemed like many years. We'd go into these detention centers, we'd offer programming, and we would talk about the urgency, right? But how long did it take to actually get the raise the age passed?
Right. So New York State, up until 2 years ago, was one of two states. North Carolina was the other, that automatically prosecuted 16 and 17-year-olds as adults for any crime that they committed. And this was a practice that New York State had been engaging in for a while. What you saw kind of over the history of New York State's practice of prosecuting young people was kind of an escalation in who they would prosecute. So originally 16 and 17-year-olds were automatically prosecuted. So if you were 16 years old and you hopped a turnstile, if you were accused of stealing a book bag, or if you were accused of a murder, you were prosecuted as an adult, which meant you automatically went to Rikers Island if you couldn't post bail or if you were denied bail. And eventually, if you were sentenced to serve over a year's time, you would go to an adult prison, which there were a number of 16 and 17-year-olds who were spending time in adult prisons. And then in the 1970s, what you saw happen, I believe it was in 1976, was New York State started to prosecute 13, 14, and 15-year-olds as adults for certain crimes. So New York State started to say, actually, we're going to begin to expand the way in which we treat young people as adults. And there was a high-profile case at that time, a young man named Willie Bosket, which really kind of propelled New York State to do that. Then you see in the late 80s, the case of the now exonerated 5 was another case where the media kind of sensationalized things. And it kind of reinforced why the state was engaging in these practices and said, look, what we've been doing for decades or since the inception of this state was right. So maybe about...
But I just want to kind of put a pin right there.
Okay.
I think during that time as well is when Gil Garcetti out of Los Angeles had called young people super predators, right? I think that was our generation, Lateefah. So that was the climate, is that we were looking at children, teenagers as these super predators. And so that, I think, also really influenced what was happening across the country. But it wasn't just New York State, but it's also North Carolina, right? That is still automatically prosecuting young people as adults, right? 16-year-olds as adults.
And I mean, the other piece is that there are a lot of states that automatically prosecute young people at 17, right? So there's a lot of work that still needs to be done around the prosecution of 17-year-olds as adults. But New York State, like every state, still prosecutes some young people as adults for certain crimes. So this isn't a practice that even New York State or states around the country are saying they're going to abandon. What they've been saying is they're going to modify this practice. And what we know is that modification, by and large, is not going to impact the many Black and brown young children who are still prosecuted as adults. I think the big piece during the course of the Raise the Age campaign that I would always say to folks is that Raise the Age was the tip of the iceberg. While it was called one of the most historic criminal justice reforms in the state, and it was, and it still is, it was really the tip of the iceberg. So much more criminal justice reform and youth justice reform needs to happen. And we really need to, from my perspective, we really need to start taking a more comprehensive approach at how we transform the criminal justice landscape. And for me, kind of standalone single pieces of legislation just isn't enough to begin to confront 30 years of a war on drugs and just the war on Black and brown families before that, and kind of that's been going on since the inception of this country. So we need to take a real, from my perspective, a more proactive and radical approach to transforming the criminal justice landscape and pushing for legislation. And also, I think, understanding that legislation alone certainly won't be enough.
Right, right. And I also want to highlight Justice League NYC was also involved in the fight to free our Bronx teenager, Pedro Hernandez, who spent more than a year locked up inside Rikers, missing the opportunity to attend college until prosecutors were forced to admit that they had no case. And I know his younger brother works with us at the Gathering for Justice. And so we're going to be taking a couple of questions from our first segment. So let me just bring that up. So Jackie Burns from Facebook says, how do we educate people about their rights?
I'll talk about, again, it's a 20-year-old project that we started at the Young Women's Freedom Center. But juvenile justice rights, first of all, unfortunately, Black and brown young people, while we're supposed to have inalienable rights, those rights are hardly realized. For years and years, we were at the Center for Young Women's Development, Young Women's Freedom Center, doing works on the streets with young men and young women, telling them about their rights. You have the right to ask a police officer why you're being detained. And we would come back the next day, and that young person said, when I exerted my rights, I was slammed into the wall. I was brutally beaten. I was called a nigger. It's important for young people to know their rights, and every organization, like the ones on the line, are doing real powerful work, and I'm sure there's some websites we can talk about. But we got a lawyer, Rebecca Evanson, to help us write essentially a book called No Justice, KNOW, and we from arrest to disposition, we wanted parents and young people and victims, who are oftentimes also the ones being accused, to understand what their rights were throughout the process. We can fight for our rights, but it's important to know, until we're humanized, we don't really realize those rights. But the organizations who are represented here, we all have really great resources, and we should share them.
Yeah, I think one of the ways in which I think young people can know their rights, I always say youth need to know their rights and more, because knowing your rights is certainly not sufficient to stop the police from doing whatever the hell they want. And sometimes it really exacerbates or makes police officers get even crazier with you. But I think schools are a place where we shouldn't be pushing young people out of schools and into the hands of law enforcement and what folks refer to as the school to prison pipeline. But we should be using schools as a place for young people to understand their rights, to learn about their rights. I mean, I think it's particularly important at a time like now, where in New York City, the mayor has kind of passed these important kind of laws in New York City public schools. They're reducing the number of days a young person could be suspended to 20. They're also implementing restorative justice in middle schools and high schools, and they're limiting the number of arrests, or trying to limit the number of arrests for low-level offenses in New York City public schools. I think with that kind of expansion and those wins that folks like UIC and Dignity in Schools campaign have kind of led, it's an opportunity to say, well, let's educate young people about their rights and other things that can kind of keep them protected, not only while they're in school, but when they're in their communities and they may be under siege by NYPD.
Well, thank you so much, Lateefah. We love you. Thank you for the wonderful work that you're doing. And if our team could also pull up the Young Women's Freedom Center so that we could share the link and website with our viewers. We're going to go ahead and move on to the next segment, which is a conversation with Korey Weiss. So Angelo, you will be staying with us. And so Korey Weiss is one of the men whose stories are at the center of When They See Us. Korey was 16 years old when he was arrested and accused of a crime he did not commit. He served 13 years in prison and was exonerated along with the rest of the Central Park Five in 2002. His story has been shared in books, magazine, documentaries, and now in the film series When They See Us. Angelo, Korey, thank you for being here tonight.
Right into it. The first, wait 1 second. Yeah, because we can't see ourselves.
And so I also want to say, I know that when we're talking about raise the age, Korey was in that situation, right? Korey was 16, so he was automatically prosecuted in New York as an adult. And so go ahead, Angelo, take it away. Thank you both for being with us, and I will return shortly.
Thank you, Korey, for being here. The first question was, you know, when You See Us Now has been critically acclaimed. Netflix is saying it is the most watched series it's had. The first question is, how do you feel about kind of being received that well in that series and now the world watching and knowing the story again?
Amazing film. It's amazing. It's amazing.
Yeah. Is there, I think your part of the story, I think it was in part 4. A lot of folks were tremendously moved and felt emotional by watching your kind of part specifically. How has that felt? Like, and has it been kind of like reliving some of the trauma for you to see it?
Oh, yeah. Pretty much just looking at your life to the point where you poetry, you are poetry in motion, but you're not able to see yourself.
Yeah.
Until you do, you'd be like, wow, it's beautiful.
Yeah.
It's beautiful. It's hard. It's a roller coaster ride, but it's necessary to see.
Yeah. Are there things in the series that you say, I wish there were other things that were in it that weren't included?
Yeah.
You feel like everything that
It's
kind of
good.
was in the series was necessary? How have folks been receiving you, I guess, when you're coming across folks now, or when you're, you know, like at the BT Awards and folks are talking to you? What is some of the feedback you've received?
Well, they more so go to my little actor saying that he did a beautiful job,
Right.
and he just embodied me.
Yeah.
He embodied me and did a great job.
Yeah. Now, I think for folks who are like been doing criminal justice reform and understand kind of how we get to a place where we have 5, 16, 15, and 14-year-olds charged as adults and spending all this time in jail, and folks have been working on these issues for a long time. Do you feel like much has changed since the case in 1989 till now? And do you think much has changed?
To some degree. Due to the changing of period, the people.
Yeah.
People moving, people coming in. I would say that.
Yeah.
Compared to, if anything, I found myself watching the news and something may pop up that may be done with it.
Right.
Totally different, you know. Yeah, I'll say about 50-50.
Right. So some things have changed, certainly have.
Yeah.
If you don't mind, when you think back on your time being incarcerated over a decade's time, did you come across and encounter a lot of other young people who were in similar situations as you, who were either 16 or came in at 16 or 17 years old?
Well, me, pretty much growing up in the system, and I think it was coming from Pataki at the same time. But me coming up in the system, I began to see a lot of young kids coming through the system.
Right.
I said, wow. So, you know, I'm pretty much around that time, I'm pretty much an old head if I was there, looking at the babies coming through. Right then, they just bringing juveniles up in here now.
Yeah.
So other than that.
So during your time inside, you felt like it increased.
Yeah.
The number of 16 and 17-year-olds coming into the system.
Right.
Yeah. And do you feel like they experienced similar things to you, like as time progressed, or do you think things changed, like because it was so many 16 and 17-year-olds coming into the system, their experience was different?
Do I think their experience is different?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And in what ways would you say?
Because there's been too much there's been too much attention dealing with this case as it is. So the system don't want to repeat.
Yeah. Yeah.
So they're trying to learn from that as it is. So they don't want to repeat.
Yeah. One of the things folks are also talking about, I think, after watching the series is like the role the media played in the case. And, you know, I think folks generally can look at the criminal justice system and say there are things about the system that are flawed, and there are things about the system that are broken, and some folks may say it's working just right. What role do you think the media played in helping kind of the state get a conviction and demonizing all of y'all as well?
It's the devil's advocate, that's all.
Yeah.
This is devil's advocate. That's all. Because once the media jump on there and they just jump on it like a pack of hyenas, they just jump on there, and whoever they jumping on, they in the system, and the media just still go on with it. So it just the media's bananas.
Yeah. Yeah. Do you think if the media responded differently?
But they can't.
And why do you say that?
Because they have bills to pay.
Right.
They want that gossip.
Yeah.
They boss want that gossip. It's like looking at Spider-Man. His boss want that gossip.
Right.
Don't come in here without the gossip.
Yeah.
So you know,
Yeah. Yeah.
gossip sell.
Right. Right. When you first got sentenced and then first went to state prison, did you feel at any point like maybe all hope was lost? Did that occur to you, or were you always saying there's going to be hope, there's light at the end of the tunnel, there's a way out of this?
There's no such thing as those words. Because once you're in there, you just playing to survive. That's all.
Yeah.
It's a survival game. It's just a survival game. If you're strong, God bless you. If you're not, you go to perish. So it's just a survival game.
Is there anything that you'd want to share with folks that you haven't been able to share about the experience, or even about how you feel now after when you see us having the kind of success it's had, or even thinking about young people who may find themselves in a similar situation? Is there anything you'd like to share or thoughts you have about, you know, any of those things?
One, the blueprint's there. The Netflix series, the drama series, the blueprint is there. Outside of that, you know, me being out and about actually louder words. So I'm in their phase.
Right.
Whether I want to answer their questions or not, I'm in their phase. But like I said, you know, when they see it, that's a blueprint to the hood. It's a blueprint. It's not it's not a whole bunch of people talking,
right.
Documentary.
Right.
It's just something to check out, get into, and you just find yourself just looking at yourself.
And I don't know, and folks who watch the series, what else, if it wasn't included, would you say kept you going while you were incarcerated?
Just maybe just taking heat from the elders in there, because the elders, they got natural life in there. So just really listening to them. Pretty much just listening to them. Pretty much just being their little jailhouse son or what have you. Just listening to them.
Right. So basically the ways in which folks were able to create family inside.
Right.
I had a question here. How do we donate to your particular work at the Innocence Project? I know you've been doing some work with them and have started a little project.
Well, out in Colorado.
Yeah.
Because the only reason why I was out there, because my law team, they live out there. But it has nothing to do with New York City Innocence Project, no.
Gotcha.
It's out in Colorado.
And what are they doing for folks who may not know exactly what the Innocence Project is doing?
In Colorado?
Yeah.
No, they're just helping pretty much help those who can't come out the system. They can't afford bail or nothing. Trying to help them out, assist them. Assist them, like I said, those who can't afford bail. and without them being really locked up in their little system out there, try to get them out on bail if they can, because some of them can't, some young minds, they just can't deal with the system. They hang up in the system. That's how strong it is. So I'm quite sure my people that's working in the Innocent Project in Colorado, I'm just quite sure they try to help them out, get them out, help their parents, help their family out.
Definitely. And since the series has come out, there's been a lot of attention around the district attorney who prosecuted you folks, District Attorney Fairstein, and she's lost some of her book deals and faced some consequences. And Justice League and other folks are asking for the cases that she oversaw during that time to be opened up so folks could take a look at it and see if she did the same thing to others, right? If others were potentially mistreated.
Miscarriage of justice.
Yes. How do you feel about that? And how do you feel about the attention and the consequences she has now experienced? And how do you feel about also the opening up of her cases?
Well, it'd be great if that happens, but like I said, Chicken's coming home to roost. It's coming back. It's coming back because of the Netflix series. I don't be trying to put no energy behind it, put no energy or words behind it, but I'm just glad that because of the series, it's because it's causing heat. It's causing heat to the players that has something to do with this case here. So it's good. From her to Lateefah to the detectives, whoever's just popping up dead or what have you. That sort of remind me of the American Gangster. Now the next one to go down is Trump.
Right.
You know what I mean? Who's only in there for a minute, but that's up to his voters out in Orlando, Florida, on a low. But other than that, just chilling and waiting everybody just fall off.
Definitely. I think our final question is, if you had one piece of advice for young people who find themselves in a situation like you were there, innocently incarcerated, what would it be? What would you say to them?
What's that again?
If you had one piece of advice for a young person who found themselves in a scenario like you, where they were incarcerated for something they didn't do.
But they in or they out?
They're in.
Well, they're in, it's too late.
Mm.
Because they didn't take heed to the information that was out there before them.
Right.
You know what I mean? But like I said, to those who ain't go that far, better take heed to the program.
Yeah.
Better take heed to the program. I'm not going to sit in your face talking to you till I'm blue in the face. It's right there. It's right there on Netflix.
Right.
Take heed to it. Enjoy it. Swim in it. Cry. Boo-hoo. That's your life there.
Definitely.
If that can happen to me, it can happen to you.
Right.
Take heed to it.
Definitely.
And
I think that's all for us. Korey, folks wanted to say that the audience is sending a lot of love your way. They appreciate you showing up and speaking to them. So thank you again for your time. We appreciate you.
Yeah.
Thank you, Angelo, and thank you, Korey, for the courage you have in sharing your story and for being with us tonight. I look forward to continuing to build with you. And so now, next, I'm excited to introduce our panel of experts for a discussion changing the system from within. So it's called Let's Talk Systems. I'd like to welcome Hillary Blout, founder and executive director of the Sentence Review Project, New York City public advocate, our brother Jumaane Williams, as well as Chris Lazare of the Real Justice PAC. Thank you for joining us tonight. So I'm going to start with you, Hillary. The power of prosecutors and prosecutor elections have come under national attention thanks to when they see us, district attorneys yield an extraordinary amount. There's a lot of DA. I should just abbreviate this stuff, but DA yields an extraordinary amount of power in shaping our criminal justice system and the outcomes for Black and brown people in the justice system. Hillary, can you tell us a little bit about why you founded the Sentence Review Project and what have you accomplished since then? But I also want to take us a little deeper. What has your experience been, right, being in the court when it comes to DAs? What is the role of the DA? And then if we could then talk about the work that you're doing.
Sure. Thank you. And thank you so much for having me on this incredible, panelists. It varies, right? The role of the prosecutor varies. Technically, on paper, it's supposed to be upholding the Constitution. It's supposed to be protecting the rights of victims and also protecting the constitutional rights of defendants. It's supposed to be about holding people accountable when they break the law. And ultimately, it's about making sure our community is safe. I think that the problem is that different prosecutors interpret that differently, right? Some people think that safety is about throwing people away for the rest of their lives. And other prosecutors, as we've seen recently, are doing things differently. All of the attention that has come about in the last couple of years has been just so incredible to shine a light on what you just said, which is, what is the role of the prosecutor? And I think a lot of people didn't even know. I've talked to so many people that said, do we actually elect the prosecutor? I thought that was a person that was appointed. And also when you talk to people and you can see how the decisions that prosecutors are making really do weave into all of our lives. And so it's the prosecutor that's going to decide whether to charge a case or not. The prosecutor decides whether to charge a felony or a misdemeanor. The prosecutor decides if the person's going to go to prison or some other type of alternative. So it's the prosecutor has so much incredible power that they are supposed to be holding with care. And a lot of times that's just not what's happening unfortunately in the courtroom. So my organization is called the Sentence Review Project. It's called For the People. It's a project called Sentence Review Project. And I came to this work as a former prosecutor. I didn't really intend to become a prosecutor. I thought I was going to be a public defender based on, how I grew up and what I saw as a kid. I thought I was going to definitely be on the front lines as a defense attorney. But when I started to learn even back then, over a decade ago about the power of prosecutors, I thought that, if anybody's going to be out there holding people accountable, at least if I'm there, I could do it with some integrity and some compassion. Unfortunately, even though I worked with in one of the first progressive prosecuting offices in the country, the culture was, beyond entrenched. And the law was the law, and the people coming in and out of the criminal justice system were Black and brown. So as much as I wanted to focus on, crimes against women and crimes against children, along the way, I had to prosecute cases that I'm not proud of. So, I did think when I was there that I was kind of one of the good guys. And, I thought, well, I come from the hood, so I'm not making any mistakes. And it really wasn't until I started working on reform and working with, movement leaders and community activists that I really started to get the fuller picture of how, short-sighted I was. And so working in California for the last 5 years, I've been working with folks that are trying to get their lives back on track since they've come out of incarceration and have convictions on their record, helping people to remove those felonies and misdemeanors from their record. But the real turning point was going into prisons and seeing how many people that were there that just simply didn't need to be there. And then when you couple that with how much we spend to incarcerate people in this country, you just all these questions just start coming about, what are we doing? So the organization that I founded is my approach to work with prosecutors across the country to help them understand how their actions really have been part of the problem. I start with myself. I admit that I made mistakes along the way. I'm definitely not, kind of in these forums, sort of patting myself on the back. I'm really in these forums to say, I understand why the culture may have you doing things a certain way, but that it behooves all prosecutors to really understand the collateral damage that's happening from these daily decisions. And so I work with them, help them to understand that, and then right at that same moment, equip them with tools and resources so that they can be part of the solution. So that's the work that I do. And I think later in the segment, we'll be talking about some of the solutions. And I'd love to be able to talk a little bit about a law here in California, which is sort of the first attempt to give prosecutors a tool to do the right thing.
Thank you. Thank you. And for those of you who are watching, please remember to post your questions in the comments or tag us on Twitter at NY Justice League. And so I think that's a great segue into, I mean, first of all, I just want to thank you for the work and for you leading that charge. I think one of the things that I often talk about is I'm Carmen, and I think I forgot to say that in the beginning, but Carmen Perez, I'm the executive director of the Gathering for Justice. But I also came from working at probation, doing system accountability from within the system. And what I also remember is that in Santa Cruz, we were #1 in the nation on restorative justice. Yet our neighboring county, Monterey, was a very punitive county. I didn't understand how a neighboring county could be so just one block away, be incentivized for failing. And so I'm going to transition into, you know, our public advocate, because it's important to, you know, to understand that part of it is also electing progressive DAs. There has been a wave of reform in progressive prosecutors, like the election in Queens, Tiffany Caban, Larry Krasner out of Philadelphia, and Kim Fox in Chicago, who have run on a platform that is counter to the tough on crime narratives that have long gotten prosecutors elected. And again, it reminds me a lot of, you know, where we were 20, 25 years ago. In Brooklyn, District Attorney Eric Gonzalez has announced a Justice 2020 package, which aims to reduce incarceration by considering non-jail resolutions at every juncture of a case, promoting early release in most parole proceedings, and prioritizing collaboration with neighborhood organizations. So Chris, if you could please tell us, sorry, I was going to jump into Jumaane, but I'm going back to Chris. Could you please tell us about how Real Justice PAC has been supporting progressive candidates for DA and some of the victories you all have had?
Yeah, well, first off, thank you for having me on. I really appreciate it. It's an awesome talk and something that's much needed. Yeah, with Real Justice, I mean, we're working with prosecutors or DAs or state's attorneys, however you want to call them in your state, who are reform-minded, specifically around this issue. You know, we are looking for our district attorneys, our candidates, to endorse a few things around juvenile justice. #1, never trying children under the age of 21 in adult court. Pretty simple. #2, abolish juvenile life without parole sentences and all kinds of like de facto life sentences currently and retroactively. So that means like whoever's going into the system now, whoever has been in the system, they need to be reviewed. We need to stop all criminal charges for school-based disciplinary behavior. And then we also ultimately need to close every youth prison in America and any juvenile facility that's really designed to kind of hamper growth. And we want to make sure that facilities are there to rehabilitate and not be punitive. And so, you know, candidates like Tiffany Caban, Larry Krasner, Kim Fox, I mean, the list goes on, Rachel Rollins, Wes Bell. I mean, these are all folks who look at the criminal justice system in a completely different way than any prosecutor who have been traditionally trained. They are focused on restorative justice. That's the entire goal. You have to understand that, you know, individuals' brains don't stop developing until you're 25 years old. So anything that happens, whether you want to call it violent or petty, anything that runs that gamut, like you need to be able to understand that these children, they make mistakes. That's what they are. They're children. I mean, you said it earlier, like everybody has had that moment. And it doesn't matter how heinous or how bad it is, you got to understand that this is a small part in an individual's life. And so the the folks that we work with, you know, we make sure that they understand and that they believe in this philosophy. It isn't just about talking about it and saying, yeah, you know, children shouldn't be, you know, put in jail, but they actually act on it. And so it's really easy for folks to run on these things, especially now everybody wants to be a progressive, you know, this, a progressive that. But like, you got to look at their actions when they get into office. And so we work on helping folks get in, and then also holding folks accountable, honestly, who aren't doing the right thing, especially around juvenile justice.
And so before we move on, I want to kind of touch on that accountability piece. So again, what does accountability look like, right? A county that is data-driven, that is working with policy institutes, can be held accountable versus a county or a jurisdiction that has no data, right? And so when we're talking about DA accountability, I also remember being in the probation department super early in the morning, 7 in the morning to do intake. And then, you know, you kind of pass by the DA and they're already making decisions whether or not they're going to prosecute with very limited information, right? But what does accountability even look like?
I mean, accountability could look like a lot of things. I mean, we're a national group. I mean, a lot of the pressure comes from local groups who they have a lot of close ties with. We try and leverage those relationships. You know, it's hard, right? Like, accountability is hard. This comes with the whole theory of like co-governance as well. A lot of times it's not even just holding them accountable, like it's through an election, right? Like, it's not necessarily just like marching and picketing out front of their office and, you know, making sure there are good nonprofit groups and local community groups that they work with that are just like in their face all the time, making sure to, again, tell them to do the right thing, whatever it might be. A lot of times it's just holding an election. And unfortunately, and fortunately, I guess you could say, we're at the beginning of this movement. And so there are a lot of prosecutors. We're talking about 2,400 different prosecutors across the country. And we have gotten, a handful of them elected, relatively speaking. So there's a lot of work to do. But a lot of the accountability, what it looks like right now with a lot of these DAs, Carmen, is literally getting them out of office. There's so many bad prosecutors around this issue, around juvenile justice. You got to remember, I mean, you heard Korey talk about it. You all talked about it. This is a mentality of prosecutors that have been pervasive for decades, centuries, you could argue, right? I mean, it's not, hey, this is a bad thing to do, go watch When They See Us, and then you expect the prosecutor to change. I mean, you still see the prosecutors saying, that was the sixth guy, right? Even with overwhelming evidence in their face, prosecutors and DAs and state's attorneys aren't really moving the way that we need them to move. So accountability could look like a lot of things. I mean, to be perfectly honest with you, I think what we all need to be worried about right now is accountability through the electoral process. And that's what we're focused on as a PAC.
Thank you so much, Chris. And I think this segues perfectly into you, my brother, Jumaane, especially because you are holding, you're leading the charge to call on the Manhattan DA to reopen the cases handled by Linda Fairstein and Elizabeth Lederer, the prosecutors who demonstrated the racial bias in the Central Park 5. And so if you could please tell us some of the efforts. I mean, you've been on the front lines on justice reform for many, many years. You've marched with us. You've gotten arrested with us. You've actually led us to get arrested. There's just so much work that you've done. And so I want you to kind of tell us about the efforts on reopening the Fairstein cases.
Peace, Carmen. Thanks so much for having me and being on this panel. I apologize. I know my lighting is not as it should be. I did want to just go back a little because there was something that you said, if I can adjust slightly, you said that a lot of the changes in DA are because people are no longer running on being tougher on crime. And I think people actually are running on being tougher on crime. It's just no longer tougher on crime being locking up as many Black and brown people as humanly possible. So that shift on what tough on crime is has always been known, because when the violence in particular in communities were of a lighter hue, the response to that was a lot different. When the same things are going on in a darker community with a little bit more melanin in their skin, tough on crime then becomes immensely about how many bodies can we put into the criminal justice system. So I'm proud that that narrative, at least in some places, is starting to change. And I'm grateful that voters are starting to respond to what public safety means and what public safety does not mean. Because oftentimes it was the voters, and sometimes in our same neighborhoods, that were conditioned to believe that public safety was equatable to police, and public safety was equatable to DAs locking up Black and brown bodies. And that's slowly beginning to unravel, and I hope it continues. So shout out to everybody on here who's starting to change that narrative. When it comes to this particular case, I just want to shout out to Korey Wise. You know, I've seen him for so many times, National Action Network. I never knew that brother's a superhero to me right now, based on what I see that he experienced. Here, we have a DA in Manhattan, Cy Vance, who ran on quote unquote being progressive, who ran on all the things that people say when they go to a Black church and want to get elected. And there had been some things that look positive, but here we have some things that we thought were basic to ask. One was the firing of Elizabeth Lederer, and the other one, which was a simpler of the two, to be honest. I thought we might get some pushback on the firing, it may take some time, but asking that he simply look at and review the cases of Linda Fairstein, especially those where there was no DNA evidence from the advent of that technology. That seemed to me to be the simplest of the things that could be asked. And, you know, I thank Justice League. I know Tamika will be on shortly. I thank the Arc of Justice, Kirsten, John Foy, and many others who joined in that. And he simply said no. And what he said is, I just want to make sure I get it right. I do not intend to take either action at this time. And then he had the nerve to say in his letter, his response to me, like all responsible prosecutors, we embrace our duty to pursue fairness and truth wherever that may lead us. And that seems to be a little bit of salt in the wound. But it's remarkable to me that we now have to mount a campaign, and we now have to use precious energy to simply ask this man to review cases. And I said then that this is what happens when they see us, because it's just remarkable that not just this movie, which has brought it back to light, but the documentary of Ken Burns, the stories of the families and the boys themselves. We all know what happened. And so this is what happened when the system continues to try to protect itself. And it's just unfortunate.
So you bring up a really great, I think for me, when I hear that, right, that, you know, that he's not interested, they're not interested in opening the cases, reopening the cases. So I think I want to throw it back to you, Hillary, and to Chris, like, then what does that accountability look like, right? What would your organization, Hillary, what type of conversations would you have with that Manhattan DA around, you know, some of the injustices that have been done in our communities? And also, Chris, I know, you know, there are so many models that you shared with us, but would there be an opportunity for collaboration, right? Even from this town hall, to really dig deeper about what does it look like from a former DA perspective, and then an organizational perspective of coming together to have these conversations with these DAs.
You know, I mean, I think that, you know, part of the work that I'm doing is I know that Chris talked about the way that we hold prosecutors accountable is really at the ballot box, right? It's the hiring and the firing of who we want to be our elected prosecutor, and that really, it is true. That is the ultimate weapon, right? Is to get them to be accountable. You know, part of the approach that I've been taking with my work is that because there are 2,400 prosecutors and we've got 40 some odd progressive prosecutors in place, that what are we doing with all of the other prosecutors that are currently in power? You know, are there any other prosecutors that may not self-identify as being progressive, but that they do want to do good things, or they can see, they're reading the news, right? They're seeing what's happening. They understand that there's elections that are coming. And so they're going to want to hurry up and try to, you know, answer the question about what they're doing around mass incarceration. the problem that is happening that Jumaane talked about is that when you have these conversations and somebody like Cy Vance, who has a conviction integrity unit, they have a conviction review unit, it's not like that's an office that needs to be trained on the fact that DNA evidence or the fact that exoneration rates are skyrocketing because we're beginning to uncover all of the miscarriages of justice. So, it doesn't even seem like there's a conversation, unfortunately, to be had with Cy Vance at this point. If this case isn't the case to make him stay up at night each night and completely turn the house upside down and investigate every single case that those prosecutors were involved in, then I mean, I don't even know why he's there. So, I mean, you hear stories, right? But to have something displayed so effortlessly to understand, you don't have to make these mental leaps to see how corrupt that case was. And so for the elected leader to not want to open up those cases, there's no conversation I could have with him, that's for sure.
Thank you. Thank you. Did you have anything to add, Chris? We also have a question from some of our viewers, and so
I agree. I mean, there's really no conversation to have with Cy Vance, particularly around this. If he sees this case and he's like, I'm still not gonna review her cases, especially to see how this particular case was handled. I mean, that's why, again, it's a lot of these DAs traditionally haven't got a lot of challengers, so they feel that they could just continue to keep their head down, and if they ignore it enough, that it'll go away. Obviously, the environment is changing around this, and so for us, again, like it's elections. Like, we got to find progressive prosecutors, defense attorneys, people like that who understand how bad this system is and challenge these prosecutors.
Awesome. So we have a question from Kevin Jr. Swanson. What do you have to say to those that believe that reform is not enough, that actual transformation, change cannot come from within the current system, and that we do not have the time to continue to reform the system, that it is by design and it is meant to be punitive and authoritarian?
Can you hear me?
Yep.
I think there's a lot of validity to that, and I often say the system is working how it was designed to work from the inception of this country, and that's just a true statement. If our quote-unquote founding fathers woke up and said, would you take a look, say, I don't know why you have a Black president or why women are voting, but otherwise, pretty good job of putting forth what we decided to put forth. Even with that said, there always has been a better part of America, I try to say, always pushing forward. I tried my best not to use the word reform. We really have to literally take up a system that was put in place to operate the way that it's operating and put another system down. And that's actually why I think it's so difficult. If you have a house that has a slight crack, you might be able to fill the crack. But if the foundation of the house is rotten, you have a bigger problem, and it's a lot harder. And I think that's what's happened to this country. The foundation of the country is based on what we see here. And we have some people that won't even admit that that is what's happening. But really quickly, I want to say ancillary two things. One is, I hope we start to use this as well to get folks more registered to vote. When Eric Garner's Daniel Pantaleo was not found guilty, that was a DA. And a lot of people who were found on juries are because of registering to vote. I think we missed an opportunity there. And lastly, in New York City, we're just encouraging everyone to swamp Cy Vance's office with requests to reopen this. And it's of course, when it's time for re-election, he should not be the DA. But I want to make sure his name is synonymous with a shameful act. And that's what we need to do, shame some of these people. And so his memory and his family's legacy should not be one of reform if he's not going to readjust his position on something like this.
Well, thank you for your questions. Thank you, Hillary, Chris, and Public Advocate Jumaane Williams for joining us. We're going to be moving on now to our next and final section. We're going to talk about the campaigns that are out there and what we can do with Rashad Robinson of Color of Change and our sister Tamika Mallory of Justice League NYC, and one of the original co-chairs of the Women's March on Washington. So Welcome, welcome, welcome. What are some of the campaigns that are out there? What are some of the charges? I know there are a lot of organizations. Public Advocate Jumaane talked about Kirsten being part of the campaign. So Tamika, if you could go ahead and share with us some of the work that's happening around accountability.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Carmen, for holding this town hall today. And of course, to Roland Martin Unfiltered for allowing us the opportunity to have a broader audience and impact on this evening. I was listening, and there was a lot of great things that have been stated already, throughout this entire session, a lot of education, and so grateful to all those. And of course, to my brother, Rashad Robinson, power to the people. So, there are a lot of campaigns. And one of the things that I heard earlier that I totally agree with Hillary's assessment around, at this point, what else do you say to Cy Vance? Understanding that, he's taken this type of position. We have to focus on re-election, and we have to focus on the broader mission of ensuring that real, true progressives, and I like to say that progressives means what now, right? Everyone likes to use the term progressive, but what we really need is radical justice, radical thinking, and radical ideas and policies that will really change and shift our conditions and the conditions of so many people across this country. And so, I understand that position. However, Cy Vance is still in office. And I think we have to just be clear about how movements begin and what will move people from a hard no to having to really deal with us and to do what it is that we are demanding. When I think about Dr. King and the struggle that he was in for the Voting Rights Act, what we know is that he was basically told by Lyndon B. Johnson that he was not going to work on the, he wouldn't sign the Voting Rights Act. He would have nothing to do with it. But because of the people who were on the ground, the fact that they went to Selma and chose to take a route that they knew people would actually be killed for walking across that bridge, and continuing to put the spotlight and awareness on it by using their own bodies in a form of nonviolence, although much violence was inflicted upon them. That is how we went from a hard no to having the Voting Rights Act signed. And so I want people to think about that as we look at this situation. It's not going to be quick and swift. It is going to take time to be able to get, because, folks who have decided that Black and brown people don't matter, they don't believe that we have the power, and they believe that we're going to go away after a while, that, we'll get upset, we'll huff and puff, maybe a few rallies, and then we're gone. But in this situation, we have a reason to be 10 toes down on the ground, continuing to focus on a strategy that really just pushes Cy Vance. The last thing I'll say, and then, come back later, is that Mark Thompson, one of our dear brothers, Reverend Mark Thompson, he was at the debate. He was in the press pool at the end of the debate, the second debate, where Kamala Harris and Senator Kamala Harris, and others, Joe Biden and all those who participated in the second debate. And he began to ask people, one in particular was Kamala Harris, to ask, do you believe that these cases should be reopened? And she said, it definitely seems that there's precedent for it. So these are the movement has to be multifaceted. We have to be everywhere. That means that we now have a presidential candidate on record saying that I believe that there should be, at least an investigation into whether or not there should be an investigation. Right. No one ever really wants to go all the way with it, but she did say something that I think was important. So that's where we are today.
Thank you. Thank you. And I also want to talk about the petition, right? And so we'll certainly make sure that everybody gets that link. All the viewers get that link. But Rashad, if you could also share with us some of the solutions. You know, Hillary talked about, you know, being a conduit for change, wanting to work with DAs to make sure that they are, you know, bringing justice and not necessarily doing, I call it the iron fist, right? I know that Justice Pat, there's so many organizations that are like-minded. There's an opportunity for us to really come together. And I always think, as a former probation officer, of what does it look like for a federal mandate on system accountability? What does data collection look like? How do we begin to incentivize systems that actually work and not that are failing? What does that even look like? But I want to pass it on to you so that you could share with us some of what you've been thinking about and the work that you all are doing.
Well, first of all, thank you, Carmen, for your leadership, for pulling us together. Tamika, it's always a pleasure to be on with you. Public advocate, Jumaane, everyone, Korey, and really following what Chris and Hillary were talking about in terms of the role of DAs. And I want to both talk about that for a second and then talk about some very clear things that everyday people can do in their community now, as it relates to building the type of power that changes the rules as it relates to prosecutors. And so, as both Chris and Hillary said, there are 2,400 prosecutors around the country. And yes, there is a movement to change the incentive structures for prosecutors, change what prosecutors believe their job is, and change what the public believe that prosecutors' job is. And as a result, prosecutors having to be nervous about disappointing Black people, having to be nervous about disappointing brown people, having to be nervous about disappointing poor people. And in essence, that is what electoral power sort of adds up to, right? It adds up to us building enough energy inside of a system to force that system to change. And so we have a set of 6 demands that we've worked across the movement with that really sort of live on this platform called winningjustice.org. And so if you go to winningjustice.org, it is a multifaceted platform. It's the only national place where you can search for who your prosecutor is. And then you can find out information on your prosecutor. You can also look up the various demands, and those demands are not just sort of color of change demands. Those demands have been pulled together by organizations around the country through convenings over the last several years, where folks have come together and wrestled with what were the things we were going to put on, and what are the things that are also really important, but we can't ask for everything right away and keep the momentum. And so it's things like treat kids as kids. It's about transparency. It's about dealing with money bail. It's about a set of policies that are litmus tests, right? That if these prosecutors can't pass this bar, then they don't deserve our support. One of the great things, and really a lot of praise needs to go to the brilliant leader, Ava DuVernay. She's creative, she's a genius in that regard, but she's also an advocate. And Ava was very clear through this process that she wanted to make sure that people could take action. And so she worked with us, and we worked with Netflix to create a microsite that was able to translate people from having that anger, that passion, that energy to actual action. And so if you go to winningjustice.org and you put a backslash and you put WTSU, so for like when they see us, so backslash WTSU, you'll be taken to a whole set of current actions that really relate to the themes in the movie, from juvenile justice issues in local communities to some of the campaigns around holding some of the folks who were the principals in the movie, the people who were behind it all. But I want to zoom out quickly and just simply say that that's about elections. That's about getting what we can get inside of the sort of 40 and 60-yard line. But that's not enough, right? Prosecutors, the incentive structures for prosecutors, even the best prosecutors, are flawed. Prosecutors have way too much power, period, even the best ones. Prosecutors have laws about prosecuting for things that they shouldn't have to prosecute for. And so it shouldn't be the thing where Larry Krasner says, I'm not prosecuting these marijuana cases. it shouldn't be a question about whether or not he prosecutes the marijuana cases. And our movement shouldn't have to like rapidly engage every election cycle in hopes in each place that we get someone that's gonna defy some of these like laws in order to like actually make sure communities are both safe and just. And so we have to work to change the laws. And that's the difference between reform and transformation. We have to fundamentally change the way the system operates. And that means getting the profiteers out of the justice system. This is not just about private prisons. It's about at every phase in the system. Someone is profiting off of it, and that means that someone is lobbying off of it. Someone's job depends on more Black and brown bodies being behind bars. From the bail system, where the insurance companies behind bail have a $2.5 billion industry. Oftentimes when you think about bail, you think about those local bail bonds that are outside of the courts. And but actually they're all backed by major insurance companies. And so an example of that is Bankers Insurance. If you go to Bankers Insurance's website, they say nothing about backing the bail bond industry. They have, you know, information about insuring people's homes in Florida from floods, but actually they make more money off the bail industry. There are about 10 companies that account for over $1 billion off of the bail industry. And if any one of us thinks that they're gonna go down lightly, that we can change bail reform without them scrapping and fighting to make sure that they keep their kids' college education funds and their beach houses, then I have a bridge in Brooklyn to sell you. Because quite frankly, we have, and this is why it comes down to building power. And so part of what we're trying to do, both as it relates to the bail industry, as it relates to prosecutors' offices, is at times, yes, we need to pass new laws to deal with harm reduction. Yes, we need to change the rules as they exist now. But that has to be a step on the way of transforming the incentive structures for how all of this stuff works. And so join us at the When They See Us sort of website. So go to winningjustice.org. You can text the word color to 225568. That's the word color to 225568. And then if you go to colorofchange.org, there's a whole host of petitions that we've partnered with The Gathering and with other groups on in terms of Linda Fairstein and all of those. And those are ways to take this outrage to action, right? Every single day. The final thing I'll say and turn it back over to my friends about Winning Justice platform is that there's a great video on there. It's an animated video that Carmen does the voice for. And it really describes all the ways that prosecutors trap people. It's really just great. It's slick. So if there are people in your life who like don't quite get it, you could send them this video and they can then quickly sort of see all the ways, and it's animated. It has like, it really walks people through it in a really clear way. I know for folks who have joined us tonight, they may have a lot more information on this issue, but how do you sort of get someone in your life who may have seen the movie and wants to know more so they can talk about it? This video is a great way. And then finally, there's a way to create a squad in your community. And squads are being created all around the country that are working with us to hold DAs accountable. And from there, we work with people to develop action plans and to develop the type of work. So these prosecutors recognize that the work that's happening in Philadelphia, the election that just happened in Queens, the DA, the new DA in Chicago and many other places, that could happen in their community next. We are building a movement that will force folks to either be nervous about disappointing us or wish they had been. And that is what translating the presence of this issue, the presence of this moment into the actual power to change the rules.
Thank you. Thank you. I think that was, we were inspired by the conversations that were happening just with regular folks, right, to host this town hall. And so thank you for allowing us to kind of get an idea of how people could get involved. And so I know that we're going to be wrapping up. And so thank you both for joining us. I want to give folks the opportunity to also kind of give some last words, and also take it back to you, Tamika, if you could kind of share with us what is going to be happening next here. I know we did have a conversation with Color of Change a couple days ago, and there are a lot of things that are happening. And so thank you both again for giving us entry points, right? For people who are interested in getting involved, to channel that anger that everybody felt after watching the 4 segments. And you know, how can we hold our DAs accountable? How could we understand, you know, to I think your and Hillary's point, Rashad, most of us in our communities don't know who our DAs are, right? It's until we enter the system, and we all have a family member, we all have personally probably entered the system. We all know that it impacts us, particularly Black, brown, and poor people. And so thank you for raising that. I really appreciate it. I know that we have shared the website winningjustice.org. But Tamika, if you could share with us some of the next steps that we all are taking in order to continue this fight.
You know, I want to start off in my closing by just trying to help people frame sort of what is happening here. You know, there's been this sort of this narrative that we can't use a movie, you know, a film as a reason to reopen cases, that this is a film, it's fictional. I've been working with the Central Park 5, now the Exonerated 5, for a long time. The majority of them I consider to be brothers. And when I called, you know, right after watching this film, I called both Jumaane and Yusef Salaam and said, I think we need to have the Linda Fairstein cases reopened so that we can find our brothers and sisters and siblings who may be locked up across the state of New York under the same exact framing and prosecutorial misconduct. What we know is that this is not new. The information in this film is not new to us. We've been knowing this. We've seen this over and over again. And in fact, Ken Burns has a documentary out that people can go and research right now to learn about this case from multiple perspectives, but the information is the same. And as Rashad said, we also know that Ava, and the way in which she puts this creative piece together, is just giving us an opportunity to really digest it and to understand what these men went through, what these young boys who are now men have gone through. So when people are pushing back saying it's just a film, I want folks to feel empowered that they can actually say, this is not new information. We already knew that this happened. But what I am so proud of is that the young men of Central Park 5 are saying we need to make sure that we go back and get our brothers and sisters. And so with all that Rashad has laid out tonight, of all the things that we have to do to ensure that this is across the country, we are protecting our brothers and sisters. But we know here in New York City, this particular prosecutor has other cases that we have looked at. We've already found at least one case that we are sure that there was prosecutorial misconduct very similar. So this is again a very, very serious fight. Now, there is the petition. The petition gives us an opportunity across the country to say to Cy Vance here in Manhattan, we're all watching you. We're all watching you, and we demand that there be justice in not the Central Park 5's case, in all the cases that this woman has ever put her hands on. So that's number one, sign the petition. Also, when there's a call out to show up at rallies or to make calls to the DA's office, to write letters, emails, take the time to do that, because there needs to be a clear understanding that there is pressure being applied here. We will forever probably have something happening every week that people can participate in. We're in the process of planning a leadership meeting where folks will be able to get the information and to figure out where where do you fit? What is your role? What do you do best? Do you have a legal committee that you can be a part of, to help us with some of the research? And organizers and clergy can also have a role. Especially if you're in Manhattan, you need to make sure that Cy Vance does not show up at your church without asking him, why are you not holding Linda Fairstein accountable? So there's a lot that people can get involved in. I hope that folks have really taken heed to all the different steps and the places that they can fit in, and just know that you as one person sitting at your home, in your home right now, have the ability to join this fight. This is not a fight for the rich. It's not a fight for people who are above your head, for academics. This is a fight for everyday people, and we need your support, because this is for our brothers and sisters and siblings who, we need to protect and go back and get them.
I want to thank you all again. Before I give folks the opportunity to say some last words, Tamika, I think you reminded me of a situation that happened when I was 17 years old. And I remember when my sister's life was taken, there was a DA that had asked my father, they wanted to prosecute the young man that was responsible for her death. And I remember my father saying, I can't take another mother's child away, right? And so oftentimes there are DAs that go out and do what they feel like doing without really honoring what the victims want in the first place. And so again, I think, the way in which we as regular folks, never in my life did I ever see our family navigating through the system as victims. Our family, had navigated in a different way, with some of our families being in and out. But again, this happens to everyday people, right? We have to know what we can be a part of. I think what you laid out in New York is tangible. We also have the petition. We have a website, winningjustice.org. There's different ways in which people could get involved. And I think just myself, somebody who was 17 years old, I never thought I'd be a justice advocate, right? That wasn't the path that I thought I thought I was going to be somebody else, but because of what happened in our family, it took us down this road. And so thank you for that reminder. I just want to empower people to know that, you can make a difference regardless of how much information you have. It's really about leading with your heart. And so I want to go ahead and,
that we give a shout out to Minister Kirsten Foy. I know you mentioned it.
Yes.
Justice. They went out to churches, canvassing all over Manhattan on Sunday, making sure that pastors and congregations know about this situation and know what they can do. So let's give our brother,
Thank you. And so we want to go ahead and bring it all the way back. So if Lateefah, if you're still on, if you have any last words, we're going to go down the line. And again, thank you all for joining. Do we have Angelo Pinto still on? Any final words? All right, we're going to go ahead and go with Hillary. Please, any final words? Unmute. Sorry. Go ahead.
Oh, okay. I just wanted to thank you again for letting me kind of share a little bit about what we're doing here in California, and just kind of shameless plug, but it's also about what you just mentioned, which is people need to know exactly what they can do. And we're hoping that this is something that's going to take shape in other parts of the country. But at least for people that are watching and you have a loved one in prison in California, there is a law in California where you can literally ask the prosecutor that prosecuted that case to revisit that case. So the law in California allows prosecutors to reevaluate their own sentences and then facilitate the release of incarcerated people when we can show the prosecutor that they don't need to be there. So that's one thing we have here in California, and we're hoping that this travels throughout the country.
Thank you. Chris, any final thoughts, any final words? Thank you again, Hillary, for joining.
Yes, I just want to say thank you so much for having this again. This was an amazing experience. I just want to say, obviously elections matter. Look what's happening right now in Queens. A few thousand votes literally is deciding this race, and is literally going to impact millions of people when Tiffany, she's already the winner, but officially declared the winner. And this could happen anywhere and everywhere. Again, most of these DAs across the country have not been confronted with a legitimate challenge. And when we organize, we win. It's very obvious. It's happening in Virginia. It just happened in New York. And 2020 is going to be a big year. So for those of y'all who are really interested, we have a bunch of great organizations on this talk right now. They will all, I'm sure, be doing something in some capacity on these races. Join us, join them, join something, because we could win big in 2020 and change the landscape of criminal justice in this country. Thank you.
Great. Thank you again, Chris, for joining us, and a big shout out to Sean King, who connected us. Tamika, any final thoughts, words?
Ever. What? That was only I'm hungry.
Tamika.
Did you want me to say something, Carmen?
You got any final words, thoughts? Please send my love to Linda. I could hear her.
I already ran my mouth a lot. So, thank you for again having this session tonight, and let's just continue to work. And thanks everyone else who joined.
Thank you. Rashad, any final words?
Just want to thank you all for putting this together, for your leadership, and bringing us together. And once again, right, let's move from analysis, let's move from outrage, let's move from passion to action. Strategic action, collective action is the only way that we channel this work into the ability to change the rules. And so text the word color to 225568. Join us at winningjustice.org. And as you continue to sort of examine and look at this system, find groups locally and nationally that you can be part of. This is not about us being out there individual. This is about, once again, collective action, being part of something bigger and bringing that energy to bear on decision makers who need to be nervous about disappointing our communities. Thank you again. It's always a pleasure to be with y'all.
Thank you. Thank you all so much. I am Carmen. Am I unmuted? Okay. So I just want, for those of you who are interested in continuing this conversation, please follow us at NY Justice League, as well as visit our website, www.gatheringforjustice.org. Thank you for joining us tonight. Thank you to our partners, Black Public Media and Roland Martin, for streaming. And thank you for all the panelists. You were all amazing. I'm looking forward to the next phase of this conversation and connecting offline. So thank you, everybody. Again, follow us at NY Justice League. Thank you for the conversation. There is something that you could do. Don't wait until it's too late or something happens to your family. And it was great talking to my friends. I love and respect y'all. Peace.
Thank you, Carmen.
Oh, we can screenshot it because the live is gonna go live.
Can you be quiet, Linda?
Hey fam, I want you to like, share, and subscribe to our YouTube channel, youtube.com/Roland S. Martin. And don't forget to turn on your notifications. You want to support Roland Martin Unfiltered? Be sure to join our Bring the Funk fan club. Every dollar that you give to us supports our daily digital show. There's only one daily digital show out here that keeps it black and keep it real as Roland Martin Unfiltered. Support the Roland Martin Unfiltered daily digital show by going to RolandMartinUnfiltered.com. Our goal is to get 20,000 of our fans contributing $50 each for the whole year. You can make this possible. RolandMartinUnfiltered.com.
Hey everybody, this is Sherry Shepherd. You're watching Roland Martin Unfiltered, and while he's doing Unfiltered, I'm practicing the wobble. Yes, I am. Because Roland Martin's the one, he will do it backwards, he will do it on the side. He messes everybody up when he gets into the wobble, because he doesn't know how to do it, so he does it backwards. And it just messes me up every single time. So I'm working on it. I got it. You got Roland Martin.
Hi, my name is Latoya Luckett, and you're watching Roland Martin Unfiltered.
What's going on, everybody? It's your boy Mac Wiles, and you are watching Roland Martin Unfiltered.
What's up, y'all? It's Ryan Destiny, and you're watching Roland Martin Unfiltered.
What up, Lana Well, and you are watching Roland Martin Unfiltered.
Hey fam, want to check out Roland Martin Unfiltered, the blackest show on all of digital, cable, and broadcast. Check out our audio podcast. There's only one daily digital show out here that keeps it black and keep it real. It's Roland Martin Unfiltered. Press play. You want to check out Roland Martin Unfiltered? YouTube.com/Roland S. Martin. And subscribe to our YouTube channel. There's only one daily digital show out here that keeps it black and keep it real. It's Roland Martin Unfiltered. See that name right there? Roland Martin Unfiltered. Like, share, and subscribe to our YouTube channel. That's YouTube.com/Roland S. Martin. And don't forget to turn on your notifications so when we go live, you'll know it.